with that, I think we can start. So do any of the panelists want to go first and introduce themselves?
Are we volunteer?
Oh, I raised my hand. Sorry if you didn't see.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Sure. Hey, y'all. I'm Maddie. I'm from South Florida. I'm a senior at the King's Academy currently, and I've been doing speech and debate for 4 years now. I primarily am in congressional debate and extemporaneous speaking. And as much as I love the speech and debate community, as we're all here today, we noticed there's, some issues that have come up and have caught our attention that we want to change. And I'm glad that I can be here today. I am a senior, and with that, I'm going to hopefully go to college for international relations and political science and take on these experiences that I've learned in debate and try and change the world in the name of justice.
All right, I think the next person is Paulina.
Hi, I'm a senior. I've been doing speech and debate for 4 years. The first 2 years I was at a different school and I would do it a lot more often. I would compete in extemporaneous and Lincoln Douglas and public forum. Especially loved public forum with my partner. But when I moved schools to start a new team, I realized I really need to focus on having a foundation that's built upon having respectful terms constantly be used. I mean, before I had the speech and debate team, there was a thing called the N-word club at my school, and it was horrible. And I'm glad that there's a lot more progress, hopefully, because of the work that I've done. But Beyond Resolved has done a lot to teach me about what speech and debate should really be about. Oh, fun fact about me, I also want to study international relations. So I salute you, Maddie. Awesome.
All right, David.
Yeah, I can go ahead. Hi, I'm David. I am a sophomore at the University of Michigan. I did PF for Unionville, and now I kind of coach around for a few teams. But I would say my fun fact is at Michigan, I'm studying public policy, kind of the same goals as others have stated to hopefully make a change for the better in the world, because a lot of the issues that exist in the debate space are oftentimes magnified in the world. So hopefully there's some change we can do with that.
All right. Nabiha, did you hear anything from the other speaker yet?
Nope.
Okay, that's fine. I think we can just start with the questions. So.
Oh wait, rest of introductions?
Oh, sorry. Is that not everyone?
No.
Oh, okay.
We have a few more panelists, so feel free to raise your hand if you would like to speak next.
I can go. Yeah. So my name is Anya. I use they them pronouns. I debate for Phillips Exeter right now. It's my 4th year of speech and debate. I did policy, PF. I do LD now, and I did both the U.S. and international extemp and oratory when I did speech. What else? I debated for a small public school program for a few years before I went to Exeter. And then I guess everyone has been talking about what they're studying, which I don't really know. I guess I'm pretty into gender studies. I guess it's my fun fact.
Okay, that's all the panelists.
All right, cool. Sorry about that. I'm not completely familiar with all the panelists, but Nabiha is. So now we're gonna get started with the questions. So, and we'll just use the same format of like hand raising. So the first question is, how is your experience in speech and debate shaped by money?
My camera. Oh,
All right, Paulina.
Hi, yeah, the first 2 years, the school that I mentioned, it was actually based basically on all these siblings who were obviously all related to each other, but they all had a lot of money and they would consistently be president every single year. Like the siblings had like this dynasty that became like every family function was at their house. They always had like tournament money and they would like flex it. They'd be like, oh, like that's at the bottom of my like backpack. I don't know how you guys don't have it already. Or and it would just be like all the parents who, like, if there was like a nuclear family type of situation, all the moms would always volunteer all their time and all their money, and they would always ask me like, where are your parents at? Or like, why don't you try to get your parents more involved? And I noticed that even though I went to a school where there was a large amount of kids who were in poverty, speech and debate was sort of like the elitist club on campus. And it was horrifying. Even now I go to like a school that has, I guess, like a lesser percentage of kids who are in poverty, but if anything, it just makes it so that way they're blind to what's happening. At least at my old school, I won't name them, I won't defame them, but they were aware of the fact that they were like a very elitist club on campus, and they prided themselves on it. In every class discussion, you knew which kids were which. And they also put me aside to like work on my accent, like on my diction that I had, because my Spanish is my first language. And like it turned into a very, very classist system. And it was just magnified by the North County schools. I'm from San Diego, but I'm like from like 15 minutes away from the border. But the schools that would be in the north, it would be so obvious that they had so much more money. Like they would have these laptop stands and like the newest MacBook Air Pros, whatever. And I felt like it became a lot more about sophistry than about the actual substance in your speeches. So I, I hope everyone has a better experience, but if not, I mean, please talk about them, because even as I'm in my own team, I'm trying to recognize other schools' problems as well.
I could take up next if that's fine by everyone.
Sure.
Cool. So I've been in and out of private and public schools all throughout my high school career. I've switched several times as well, so I can relate to that. And starting off in a private school with speech and debate was fairly interesting, and having, a debate coach switch like mid-year was also really interesting. So there was a lot of things going on where it kind of was like subsidized debate tournaments, and when like your tournaments, you were given grants as such to go away, you had the ability to go to more debate tournaments and things like that. But when the coach had switched for me my freshman year, all of those different grants and things were lost. So I had gone to that school basically on like a scholarship and financial aid. So I didn't have all these luxuries as, all these other students did, to go to the school and to pay for all these debate tournaments. And at that prior school that I was at, debate wasn't exactly like, the top tier thing at the school, and it wasn't their first priority. So they weren't giving as much funding to debate as they would, for athletics and sports. And that seems like a common trend anywhere really that I look. But as soon as that debate coach had been changed, all of like the money for tournaments skyrocketed. Even locals, which are usually more affordable to most, all the prices had changed. And I mean, this isn't really as serious as Paulina's case, but the fact of the matter is, for me, not being able to necessarily afford to go to these tournaments, I lost out on opportunities that others could have gone on. And then when I switched out of the private school system into public school, it really is a different change. I feel like the people there are somewhat more grateful sometimes than those who are in private school, and people who have, more affluence and money and have all these opportunities sort of just like handed to them. And there we had to work more, we had opportunities for fundraisers, and we really could, earn more money. But it's funny how the world is really shaped by money rather than, merit or other types of ways to earn your way through the world. Kind of relating back to what Paulina was saying earlier, how it shaped the way that they could, get through. But that's really my experience with how money's shaped my debate career thus far.
Thank you for sharing, Maddie. Next, David has raised his hand, so feel free to take the floor.
Awesome. Yeah, so when I debated, I went to Unionville High School, which is kind of a smaller, like rural public school. I I was lucky enough where my parents were able to afford sending us to tournaments or sending me to a few tournaments. However, a lot of the kids on my team were unable to go to as many tournaments as I was because our entire debate school, right, small rural public school, not much funding or at all actually. So it was all out of pocket, paid for by the students. So there are definitely instances when I debated of like other PF teams that weren't able to go, or like my partner wasn't able to afford, so I would have to not be able to go, or something along those lines. And even for my own family in the earlier stages of my career, because we had some other like family stuff come up. But besides the point, I think definitely fundraising was a huge part of it. So we, like our high school did a lot of fundraising events, and some of them were actually fairly successful, and I kind of get into them later because I think some of the other questions relate to it. But I think fundraising was definitely something that drove a lot of my debate experience. And even as a coach now, when I'm not like as too involved in the debate circuit, the kids I coached have also faced similar barriers. I know the teams, or some of the teams that I coached last year, oftentimes they were the ones paying for their own tournaments, where they would like, it would be their money that they would earn like working like summer jobs or whatever, or like money that's gifted to them from like family members. They would use that money to pay for like tournament entry fees, plane tickets, hotels, that kind of stuff. So it was kind of a journey last year coaching those types of kids, because we would always try to like look for ways to cut costs in certain ways. So like, for example, some tournaments we would stay at like Airbnbs, and like we'd sleep on like, couches or whatnot if they were there. Different kind of ways like that to try to be able to keep costs as low as possible. So I'd say that's probably my experience, trying to find the most efficient ways to get around a lot of the cost barriers that exist in debate, because they're definitely quite large.
Yeah, absolutely. Next, Anya.
Yeah, sure. This feels like a very big question to unpack. I'm just thinking. I think before I answer this question, like I do want to recognize that I literally go to Exeter. Like we have a $1 billion endowment. I am in a position of immense privilege, and I don't have to worry about things that I think my old teammates do or that I used to worry about. And like even still, there are still moments where I recognize like my personal limitations in regards to class. Starting out, I debated for a very small like public school program, and I think that was my most stark / firsthand exposure to class disparities, where similar to what David was talking about, a lot of kids would be using their own money from work, or they would take off tournament weekends to work so they could go to the next tournament or the one after that. And I remember there was fundraising every year too. Yeah, it was like doing the budget numbers and the calculations with my coach was always very painful, because it would always be like there's never enough money for every single kid on the team, and there's always some loose end that we didn't tie up, and so that was always just very, very incredibly taxing. I think for specific teammates especially, and my experiences working with that, because our program was so small and underfunded and all of our varsity members had graduated by the time I was a sophomore, I remember I would work with novices for a lot of my practices, and there was one novice in particular when I was still doing policy. They were really intuitive and just a really fast learner, and they were really wonderful to work with. And the only shortcoming was just they didn't have stable housing. Like they just didn't have a place to go to after practice ended, and so I would have to be the one giving them supplies or like flow paper and pens for like practice rounds we would do at practice. And that was incredibly frustrating for me, because it was like, it is that feeling of like doing everything you can and then realizing that it's still not enough. And so I think for me, class has been just like this impact of realizing that like some of your teammates just can't afford to stay in the activity, or that like someone isn't going to be there at the next tournament, and that is always really hard. I think, however, like moving to Exeter, things have been so much more different, like not just in the ability and the comfort that I have now, knowing that like I can have like everything covered by the school. It is also just like having so much administrative support in terms of just like having things like judging fees, tournament fees, everything covered. And then there's still that habit of like instinctively going to like the tab room page and like emailing directors and asking for tournament like fee cuts without realizing that like I don't need to do this anymore. I would say that like even now, given my position, like at a very different place, I think that it does feel a little bit weird that I am now the person who ends up having to ask for like financial aid, or I am the person that my teammates all just sort of call out when they're like, we don't want to single you out, Anya, but you need to pay your coaching fees or stuff like that. Or even like the process of like hiring a coach in the first place was very hard, because actually that's such a privileged statement to make. Like the act of hiring a coach is hard. But no, yeah, it was very hard for me because I would have to like go through these steps and try to like figure out like if there was any way I could get financial aid without like undercutting my coach's pay, because I have a lot of respect for her and I don't want to like underpay her. But yeah, it is all just like the little things that take a lot of energy to navigate, and they add up to where you're entering rounds with a different amount of energy than someone else, or you're entering rounds with a different level of resources or a different level of energy than someone else. And I would say that it's been really draining, but it has also been like one of the places where I've received like the greatest amount of support.
Okay, thank you so much, Anya, for speaking to us. Right now, we have our final panelist here. So I'd like to introduce Nathan. Nathan, if you would be comfortable just giving us like a brief like summary of, you know, who you are, your speech and debate experience, and maybe just like a fun fact about you. And then we can like catch you up to speed with the question that like we just discussed. And then once Nathan is done speaking, all of you guys are free to actually voice any questions that you have in the chat or unmute your mics. Oh, also Nathan, if it's possible, it would be really great if you could put your pronouns in your display name so that everyone can just like, it can be easier. So yeah.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll figure out how to do that in just a second. But my name is Nathan Fair. I run a nonprofit called Debating for America's Youth, where I post free videos online. My biggest, I think, impact in the debate community probably comes from interviewing successful speech and debate kids. And I think that like then that's been my experience in speech and debate. And I've been listening to you guys' questions and or your answers to this question. And I think money has a huge impact in speech and debate, which is actually one of the reasons why I started my nonprofit and started making these educational videos, because I really realized that people who have a lot of money and come from very wealthy backgrounds have a lot easier time in getting coaches and going to these better schools and be able to travel in these tournaments, while people who don't have the money are oftentimes stopped and they can't reach these higher levels of tournaments, which is why I kind of wanted to start breaking down, I guess, the money barriers within debate. And so that's been one of my biggest goals through my nonprofit and through speech and debate, was trying to create resources that do not rely on money and that are just free for everyone on YouTube, because I think making speech and debate a more equitable place will bring more people in. And so that's been one of my biggest drives. And it's just been a really cool opportunity to see a lot of people grow in speech and debate and not have to use money to get ahead.
Yeah, so at this point, you can all just like put any questions that you have in the chat or unmute. And if there aren't any questions, we can move forward with our next ones. So I'll give you all a minute or so to do that. Okay, I think let's just proceed. And if you have any questions, we'll come back to those too.
All right. Okay, we have a question. Okay. Everyone can probably see it, but I'll just read out loud anyway. How successful are y'all usually at asking for tournament fee waivers? My team doesn't really do a lot of invites. And from now on, we can just have the panelists jump in and unmute, but still like raise your hand so that the other panelists kind of know who wants to talk.
I honestly didn't know there were tournament fee waivers. I don't know if it's like just because my league doesn't do them. I mean, maybe I should look into that, but I know that my school, we kind of get what's like, I call it like a pizza party fund, where we ask the district for money and they give us like $50. And it'll be like Little Caesars or something. And then we try to like use it for tournaments. And then we realize we can't get everyone in at once, and we can't like choose like equitably like who should go to the tournaments, right? So I mean, thank you for introducing me to that. I hope that my league does have them, and I'm not just like, I just haven't heard of them, but yeah, no, that's kind of sad. Okay.
Anya, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, sure. For tournament fee waivers, I guess I've definitely had more success on the national circuit, I guess to an extent. I think my ability to ask for financial aid from like NSDA Nats was a little bit more limited, I guess, just because like the NSDA is like a bigger organization. But I would say like normally tournament directors are much more generous than I expected. Um, I think for me, it is just a matter of like emailing them and explaining to them like, here's my situation. If you can do like, here's what would be optimal for me, i.e., waiving my invite fees, waiving my entry fees, and then I would usually provide judging, so I didn't have to pay judging fees. But I would ask them that specifically, and then they would let me know if we can do it or if we can't. And so some tips I think that really helped me were being specific in your ask, like explaining specifically what you need or what the tournament needs to do to meet your needs. And then also, I guess, like punctuality. I guess it's like not always in control, but the earlier the better always, because tournaments have tended to get a little bit more stingy as they get closer to the tournament date. But usually fee waivers are like pretty effective for me. I would say the one qualm that I do have, especially this year, is notably online tournament fees are a lot higher than I suspect they needed to be, especially when I compare things like UK rates from this year to last year. I understand that funding debate tournaments is really important and also really good for the usually college debate programs that they sometimes fund. I do also think that fee waivers should be more accessible to the point where they're hidden on like the 20th page of like the UK tournament invite. I probably do have a little bit more difficulty like finding these fee waivers than I think I need to. And so I think that independent of what we can do to try and make sure that we get like fee waivers approved like as quickly as possible, tournaments should be doing a lot more to make them more accessible and to make their financial aid policy a lot more transparent, because I think that for a lot of the tournaments this season, they have just been like very like touch and go, or just like independently reaching out about it.
That makes sense. Thank you so much for your answer. Pujitha, do you want to go on to the next question?
Yeah. All right. Okay. This one might already be answered by some people's answers, but if you could go back and change anything about your speech and debate experience, what would you change and how? And this is specifically related to like the same issue of money and financial resources.
Feel free to just like unmute yourselves whenever possible. We don't specifically have to do the hand raising thing. That was just like, whatever's comfortable for all of you.
I think I'll start off with this one if everyone's good with that. So my experience with speech and debate was definitely really shaky in the sense that I had a lot of sexual harassment issues going on with this. And to ask the question, would I change my experience? I mean, I wish that it had never happened, but to say, do I wish I would have changed that whole thing? If it would change the person I am today, no. But if I would have been able to skip that whole experience as a whole and still ended up the way I am today, then I would have changed it. The reason why I would contemplate saying why I wouldn't want to change anything is because I wouldn't be in the position where I am today to help others. Ever since all of that has ever happened, I have basically vouched myself for other people to not want or to sit by and let this happen to anyone else. I am, an advocate for change. Like I said, when I go into college, I want to seek justice in the system and reform. And I'm also a part of another nonprofit organization called the Speech Space, and we specifically deal with the ethic and misconduct issues within speech and debate as a whole. And to have gone through that experience and to be able to come out on top of it stronger than I was before, I think I would have to say that I wouldn't want to change necessarily that. But again, like I said, if I could just erase that whole experience, not have to like suffer and go through all of that, but still be the same person I am, then I would. But to be able to help other people go through it, what they're going through, give them more resources than I had, that's all I could really ever ask for. So at the end of the day, I would probably have to say that there's not really much that I would change.
Hi. So thank you for sharing that, Maddie. Similarly, I actually moved schools because of a really awful incident where there was a group chat where people talked about assaulting me. And when I brought up, that issue to my coach, he said it's because I'm an aggressive debater, even though the week prior he said that I was too submissive and round. And I noticed that he knew that parents weren't going to necessarily be there for me at every meeting. So I didn't really have anyone to advocate for me. And also goes into classism. I mean, he undermined my voice or my ability to get justice because of my lack of resources. But there is one bylaw, actually for the state of California, and I've talked to Beyond Resolved about this as well. We're trying to change it, but there for extemp, you have to have either like printed sources or your computer in order to participate in extemp and use sources. And that's horrible because a lot of people don't have printers, or some people run out of printer ink, like that's a thing. And a lot of people don't have access to laptops that they can bring to round. I remember I brought like a spiral notebook with me, like something like this. And I even had like it MLA sided and everything. And I used like the school laptop. And when I came to the tournament, they threw away my notes because they weren't printed and they were on a laptop. And it's like it wasn't a concern of cheating because they could fact check my sources if they wanted to. Um, it was just blatantly classes. There was no actual reason to have that kind of bylaw or to have it still now. So if I could change anything, it would be to advocate for that sooner. Maybe I know that I'm a senior, so hopefully they don't think that because I'm leaving, all of a sudden that issue goes away because it is attached to so many more students. Um, I hope that's also just California, not any other states. But I would hope for us to be a better example to others. But yeah, I don't know. Speech. I mean, speech and debate. Honestly, I don't even want to go to tournaments at this point. I prefer to just be working with my team and working on making really productive citizens because I truthfully, and I know that this work gets made fun of so much, but I get triggered when I'm in rounds and there's just kids who I know from right off like the top, like from the beginning are going to undermine me or judges are going to focus on how I slightly interrupted the male, even if my point was stronger. I mean, I feel like a lot of that stuff, I'm worried that is realistic, that I'm gonna have to face that when I work in government and stuff. But I don't want to face that like on like for voluntary reasons. If I'm just advocating for things that aren't gonna, actually come into fruition in real life, like I'd rather skip out on jumping to nuclear war and debate if I don't have to. Um, so I changed that. I'd also changed, the way that we desensitize a lot of issues in round. I mean, there's a lot of times where we talk about bullying or we talk about other triggering subjects, right? And then we go to school and then we don't even talk to the kids who are facing those issues. Or we'll talk so badly about fossil fuels, which great, we should, but then we'll want to win a plastic trophy made from fossil fuels. I mean, there's so much hypocrisy in debate, and I wish that instead of us just always like memeing around and making jokes about like politicians being so corrupt, that we would acknowledge how we're really just creating this kind of funnel for politicians to end up being that way, because there's so many speech and debate kids who are like, oh yeah, I want to be a politician, but they don't have like causes that they really believe in. They think that every discussion that they're going to have in legislation is going to escalate to nuclear war, or they're going to use like a theory or critique. And even though they're not the identity themselves, or they have no intention of following through on any of the aspects that they speak on around. So I would definitely change my attitude towards condemning that a lot sooner and more directly, instead of me just ranting about it now. I'm trying to change it. I have like a semester left. We'll see.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Anya.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I really agree with what Paulina is saying. Like it I think if there's one thing I could change, and this sounds like very optimistic for utopian, but it would be um I wish I had said more. I wish I had said it earlier, and I wish I'd actually done more. Because like everything that like Paulina is describing, like I agree with it. Like I've that definitely resonates with me, and there's this realization I have now that if I had done more or if I had said more, especially about things like, maybe things would have been different. I think that I personally didn't realize or acknowledge how much support was available to me in terms of like class and like financial aid until like I was forced to reach out for aid. And I think that if I had done anything earlier, or if I had like, I don't want to say cared a little bit more, but if I had done a little bit more work in recognizing that and making it accessible for both myself and others, I think things would have been different, maybe a good different. I like to hope that it would have been a good different, but I think that like these past 4 years and a lot of my experiences have just been me realizing that that the things that happen like genuinely do have a very tangible impact on like our ability to engage in this space. Like I know we say a lot that like inclusion controls the internal link into education, or that like safety operates at the highest layer of the round because it lets us engage in like questions of fairness or whether or not the T-shell is a good idea or not. But I think like realizing how much energy it takes to actually deal with shit outside of debate made me realize how much more I should have done in this activity before leaving to try and make it as successful as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of similar lines as their answer. I wish I was more cognizant of inequalities a lot earlier. So I'm a straight white man. I didn't face that many barriers in my experience in debate. And out of this group, I believe I am one of the older people here. So during my freshman, sophomore years, there was no Be Unresolved. There was no like speaking up safely. All these like wonderful student organizations that are sprouting up now and doing great things to kind of raise awareness within the debate community. A lot of this stuff didn't really exist like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So I think that leads to a lot of people and a lot of younger members on teams. And I still think that's an issue today, where it's like, we should have these types of discussions from the get-go on debate teams. And that should be kind of priority number one, right? Because oftentimes you only hear about barriers after being in the activity for like 2 years, 3 years, something like that. At least if you don't face the barrier specifically yourself. So I think those discussions definitely need to happen very early in the debate space. So I guess what I would change is kind of after these types of student organizations began to sprout up, like during my junior year and senior year, our team began to organize types of talks like this, where people were able to discuss their debate experiences and how it is shaped by different barriers, what we can do to alleviate these barriers. So I think these talks that we had in our junior and senior year, they were like, I think one thing I would change is make sure we're doing that from the get-go and like always. But another thing is I think making sure you're including all the new members, right? Normally, like if it's like your first time going to debate practice, like you're probably just going to think about like public speaking or something like that, right? But I think these types of things should probably enter that discussion as well when you're learning about the activity, because I think it can help shape how you participate in the activity and how you can make it a better place for not only yourself, but everyone else around you.
I will completely agree. And I wanted to add one thing. I think oftentimes, like, we can have these great, like, more abstract discussions, I will say, but sometimes it's hard to, like, we forget about people just at our tournament or at our school going through stuff that we're talking about right now. And I think I've also, like, experienced this. Like, I've seen a lot of people who are on the lower income side at, like, tournaments I go to, but, like, maybe I won't um, truly understand the implications of that when I'm at the tournament because I'm focused on myself. But then I'll get into discussions where I'll discuss like facing these, wealth inequalities in like discussions like this. I just think that maybe just being a little bit more applicable on like in my personal life and with people personally that I encounter a lot in the debate community, in addition to having these great discussions about how to solve it at a larger scale.
Yeah, that's really important. I think like now that all of the panelists have gotten a chance to speak, and thank you all for your amazing responses. The audience, you all are free to type any questions you have regarding any of the things that panelists said or any questions you have overall. So feel free to just type them or unmute, whatever works. I'll like give you all like 30 seconds to do that. Okay, and Zara, I'm just going to read your question out loud so everyone can hear it. Okay, so this question is mostly geared towards what Paulina talked about. How do you think we can combat the hypocrisy you discussed? On my team, there have been issues like sexual assault that team members were aware of, yet did not think was a big deal / didn't care to have any confrontation. However, they would run arguments about such topics, so it wouldn't feel like they were uneducated. I feel like people aren't able to realize that many issues we discuss in the debate space happen in real life. How can we work to improve that? That's a really great question. And Paulina, you can start first, and then the rest of the panelists, feel free to jump in and provide your input.
Yeah, no, oh gosh, thank you. There's definitely so many, students who will talk about how, for example, our two presidential candidates were both sexual assaulters. But then when it came down to it in our own team, they wouldn't address, the sexual assault that maybe they caused or that their homies caused. And then it's horrifying because we're actively doing the behavior that we so loudly and boldly condemn. When it comes to us, debating about it and making like critiques and bringing up like almost like these non-topical things that we kind of force to be in the debate just because they're very like bright, triggering words, and we think that the judge will vote for us because it's like sexual assault versus like changing this one little bylaw of a international treaty. Like they're gonna vote on that in their mind, so they go for it. So I do think that calling people out on topicality is huge, and I think that we should almost like have like our leagues or our states come out with a definition for topicality, or maybe even say like what are the bounds of the resolutions, because again, like it just makes it for a really unproductive conversation. And I know that my goal, I always start off like every speech by saying this, it's like my goal is to make you a better voter, judge, if you vote. If not, to encourage your friends to go vote on these really important issues, because if not, you're just standing in a high school classroom in a fancy suit, like that's all you're doing. And speech and debate, honestly, it's not even a place for like real advocacy unless you supplement it with something, because if not, you're just learning how to research and how to speak fancily, but you're not making any sort of change. And I think that a lot of kids believe that just by joining speech and debate, they've changed some portion of the world, or they think that there is some sort of legitimacy to the decisions that are made in rounds. I also think that resolutions should be more carefully worded. Obviously that's very vague, but I know that there was one my sophomore year, then I didn't even realize how offensive this was. And my mom's a Mexican immigrant, and it's like we should abolish ICE, or like should yeah, I think that was the statement. It was a parley statement, and there was kids who had like 20 minutes to like attack that, and some kids are heavily negatively affected by ICE. So imagine being on the opposite side of that resolution, and arguing that ICE should exist or shouldn't, right? So I think it has a lot to do with how it's worded. I think that states should put more boundaries on resolutions. So that way, again, like it's more like as much of a productive conversation you could have in a high school classroom where you have no legitimacy or you have no ability to actually put out these plans that you're proposing, even though you shouldn't. I know people are going to be like, you shouldn't even have plans in your public forum proposals. I know, but you get the point. In policy, for example, like um, having boundaries is good. I know that we want free speech, that we love it, but if it's going to hurt your teammates, it's going to hurt like the possibly the judge who volunteers to judge you at that tournament, then that's just going to make it a really awful experience. And you're going to honestly have less free speech at that point because you're going to have less voices who want to be included. I know that everyone thinks that like speech and debate is a place like where like kids who have a voice and opinion naturally gravitate to. But I've seen so many kids be deterred from joining speech and debate because there's kids who will just talk about their issues as if they're just like tangible objects that they're just like voting issues for the judge to vote on at the end of the flow or anything like that. So thank you for asking that. I wish I could give a more like constructive step-by-step list, but hopefully that addressed some of it. Thank you.
I would like to add to that. I think that's a great answer. I also think to combat the hypocrisy in the statements people make, maybe instead of just addressing the topics as how we can win rounds, maybe as a team, teams should sit down and talk about these issues at like a team level. Like, how is this issue affecting our team, and how can we look to like make this situation better at a very personal level? Because I think a lot of times debate, and I think that obviously winning rounds is important and is a big part of debate, but I think oftentimes by looking at arguments and real issues as a like as Paulina said, like as a voting issue rather than as a real issue that affects people, I think we can kind of distance ourselves from it. But I think we should address it, and teams should look at it from an issue that affects everyone before they, or even after they look at it from an issue of winning rounds.
I want to add a little more onto that statement as well, addressing more of the real life issues that we face and how people kind of ignore those in speech and debate. I feel that when we are researching these certain topics, we are exposing ourselves to what's going on in the real world, but whether or not you actually acknowledge those things to really exist out of speech and debate, you kind of take upon yourself. A lot of teams might have poor coaching in the sense that they're not really letting them know, like, guys, this just isn't, or y'all, like, this isn't just a game, like, this is real life out here. If you're researching this, you want to actually create change. Be like people like us, where we're actually outside of speech and debate, trying to advocate and create change rather than just going to a speech and debate tournament to just win a trophy. There's real life situations out there that we all need to acknowledge. And in the sense, moving into more of like a touchy subject of like sexual assault, harassment, and everything else along that side, it's a really touchy subject and people don't like to talk about it. So there's not really necessarily one way to make people realize that that's true or not. I feel that you have to take that upon yourself to really acknowledge that something's going on like that. And like David was saying before, there wasn't really that many outlets. Like my freshman year, when all of my issues started happening, I didn't have an outlet to go to. I just had to continue speech and debate on my own. And I have noticed the recent, surge of all of these organizations to try to help combat all of these issues, which is amazing. But where were they 4 years ago when I started debate? I mean, it's great that they're here now and that there's more outlets now, but we need to make people aware and known of all of these other outlets and all of these support groups. And I think that's one way that you could start dealing with them. And if people in school or in debate practices, wherever you are, actually acknowledge these issues rather than just push them away because it's really awkward and uneasy to talk about with students and competitors, like that shouldn't be, the only reason why we don't talk about these things. That's why there's, all of these problems within speech and debate with all of those uneasy topics, because nobody wants to tackle them. And I understand that the groups that we're creating, we're finally taking steps towards actually combating and tackling these issues. And I noticed another comment or another question in the chat, which kind of relates to this, where they ask about, like, how do you deal with this? How do you move on? I mean, with the outlets that have been reinstated, like NSDA has reinstated their ethics officers, I haven't competed on the national circuit this year, so I don't know, and we're not in person, so it's drastically different being online versus an in-person tournament. But that's like a step towards, that's an outlet that we didn't have last year. So if you're going through any of these issues, despair, or any other problems, you have these outlets. There's people like us who are willing to help you, help find avenues for you to be able to deal with what's going on. It can be really hard, but if you really do love speech and debate and you're in this to create change in the world, it can be really hard, but you will find a way to persevere through and to reach your end goal. Like, for me personally, I want to seek justice and reform in the system. And although it's been really hard my past 4 years of speech and debate with little to no outlets to tell people what's going on, to try and get change to be created, I still have only found myself to just go on by myself. Like, it's self-motivation. And I know that, might be really hard if you're going through something, really unsettling. But if there's no other outlets for you, there's obviously going to be a goal that you want to reach, and you can do it. You just have to believe in yourself. And if you're listening to this now, or you're going to listen to it in the future, just know that we're all here. Like, there's somebody to talk to. And the fact that we're all here today, sitting here talking through this panel, that's just all these other people who are here to support you, to push you through all of your problems, to make you a better person in the end. And there's really no other way to put it. So self-motivation, perseverance, you can do it, you'll get through it.
Thank you. I also wanted to add, someone mentioned, like, how do you deal with, a lot of these awful situations emotionally? And I feel like speech and debate doesn't give you the time to. I mean, you're like back and back to rounds, and sometimes like you can go through something that's quite traumatizing, and then like you don't even have time to eat, and then you have to go into your next one. And I wish I could be encouraged to have like more break between rounds and even separate it into more days if you need to for the tournament. I think that it's worth it. I think that it might even bring more competitors, because I know that there's a lot who, again, are deterred from speech and debate because they see it as like a whole marathon in a day. When, again, a lot of these issues take a lot of psychological tolls on people, especially if they experience it themselves. So I do think it's worth it. I do remember a time where someone, in that group chat said that they wanted to rape me, and then they were allowed at the next tournament I went to, and I thought that they would be removed. And when I saw them, I went to the bathroom and I threw up. And my coach told me I had to go to my next round. And it was horrible. And I felt like I was so unsupported. And there were some people who were trying to be the president the next year. And they're like, oh, yeah, I was with Paulina. I was with her when she was crying in the bathroom. And it's like, I didn't tell anyone I was crying in the bathroom or that I was vomiting. Like, I just kept it in because I had to go to my next round, and I awfully lost that round. And I was made fun of more because I looked sick, and I looked like I was like, someone said I looked constipated, and I was just like, if I tell you what happened, you're just going to demean me even more for being weak, right? So I feel like, honestly, like in speech and debate, as like, I don't mean to be a pessimist by any means, but you sometimes just can't win. Like, you can't be super like powerful and round, and then like also be like super great with like your mental health. Like, a lot of the times, like, those can be mutually exclusive for some people. Like, for me, like, it was like, if I was doing super great, it was because I didn't sleep the night before, or it's because I had to, like, work a lot more the week before, and I was super tired, and I was worried about if whether or not I would still keep that job because I was missing a couple days to go to a tournament, right? I mean, like, a lot of the stuff, like, for kids who are lower income or do have like more unconventional backgrounds, it's a lot tougher. And I think that I mean, leagues they tend to sound like they're very inclusive, that they want all the kids like with different colored hairs. Like I remember like someone, like a president, was saying that they're like, oh yeah, it doesn't matter if you have blue or gray hair, like you can join. I'm like, is that really what you think is like edgy and like unconventional? Like, is that how like hard you think we have it, that we just change your hair colors? But they need to actually be more open, and I think that the NSDA needs to mandate a lot more of that. If these leagues want to be considered NSDA recognized, or for San Diego, for example, SDA VSL organized, I think that kind of would incentivize students to actually care. I mean, for leagues to actually care, for coaches, because a lot of these things just sound really cool to talk about in our college applications. But while we're in school, while we're like actually like experiencing these really tough situations, and our friends and our teammates are, we might not notice it. And we might just use them as like pawns, like we do in debate rounds, like we do for college applications, and that's horrifying to me. So I think that a lot of it just needs to be a lot more mandated. There needs to be possibly like more chat boxes, or more, emails that you can reach out to, because sometimes when you're like in that emotional, toll, it doesn't feel like there's an email that you just want to write to. Like sometimes you just want to be left alone. And it's scary because you're deterred from honestly giving off like an emotional, sentiment, or showing how you really feel, because you're supposed to also be that super powerful woman, or like girl power, like boss that does really well in rounds. So I found that hard. But again, I hope that NSDA does pay attention to that a lot more, especially with the increase of the organizations that my peers mentioned, because it would do a lot of good. I know it would have done to me.
Thank you so much, Paulina and Maddie, for talking about your personal experiences. And I'm sure the two people that asked those questions are also very thankful for you guys like sharing your experiences. David, you can talk about yours too. There you go.
Yeah. So kind of along similar lines to what Paulina was saying, I think that if your experience in debate is one that is unsafe, or one that you are not comfortable with, I kind of, again, like more pessimistic, but I don't think you should be forced to stay in the activity, or I don't think like necessarily powering through all that stuff is always the right decision. I think oftentimes it can be the wrong decision. I recently had a discussion with, or like one of the debaters that I used to coach last year. He reached out to me the other day, like about a week ago, and he was saying how like online debate is just like making it so much more difficult for him, like health wise. Like during the tournaments on the weekends, he's like not eating at all. He's like anxious, like staying up every single night. Feels like this constant like obligation to prep, because you're like only in front of your computer in your room the entire day. So it kind of just made it seem like it's a very unhealthy thing to do, and it's like not a good thing for someone's health. So I think that kind of idea that like I'm not a big fan of the idea of like, powering through all of like whatever you're facing in the debate space, right? Debate can be awful for a lot of people. So I think that if it is truly reaching a breaking point where you are not enjoying your time in the activity, then I think you shouldn't be afraid to make a decision for your own safety, and do what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's another really important point to bring up. Anya?
Yeah, I agree 100% with what David is saying. I think I wish that I had recognized that for me. I think that if I had done that, then I would have quit debate much, much earlier. And that would have been very, very, honestly, that would have been better for me than anything else. Yeah. I think, however, also, like, I think that there is a lot of value in what Maddie is saying too, about how it's important to sometimes power through when, especially when you don't have a person in your corner and you find that you become the person for other people. It becomes a little bit harder to leave, I guess. Knowing that like it is important to have systems of support in this space, and that it is good to have strategies of support. And I guess a big part of that too is like, before we can answer this question of like what reforms need to happen, there's also the side that we should consider about like what conditions do we need to create to what structures do we need to to resist or identify to create conditions where people feel comfortable utilizing these reforms and resources. And for me, I think that also comes in the form of making the space that is most proximate to me accessible. And so what that looks like is things that are within my control, within my debate rounds, within my team's practices, within everything else that I do. What I can do most immediately to me to make the space more safe and accessible for others is also really important. And I think in terms of like this prior question of how do we approach hypocrisy maybe on our team too, my strategy, because I was slash am a relatively privileged person who had a very like comfortable position like slash social location where I had power and the ability to like speak out about it, was just to yell at my captains for around 2 hours until they shaped up and promised to do a better job. I would say that this isn't something that is like always afforded to every single person. I think that even the act of talking about some things are very exhausting. And so I think that beyond that, there's also a realization that I have power in rounds. I have the ability to withhold the ballot or withhold speaker points or in some other way make the round something that my opponents now have to care about. And so I think in round, this looks like things like being more comfortable calling out things that we see that happen in round, either microaggressions or macroaggressions, or just like, yeah, just like straight up aggression, right? Like there are so many things that we let fly in debate rounds that we really do not, that are classist, sexist, racist, queerphobic, just generally unacceptable. And so I think that we can really combat this hypocrisy by first exposing it and by first doing things like withholding the ballot through the things that we expose, i.e. One thing that I think would be really good slash has been really good for me is that I've gotten a lot more comfortable reading shells like for content warning or for pronouns, and doing that shit is really important because it shows that these issues now have consequences, or that there is now material disincentive, that you are forced to care about these things that you previously maybe had the privilege to not care about them. And so I think that when we can attach real life consequences to things that previously did not hold weight for certain people, then it becomes a lot easier to engage in discussion with them, because then they absolutely must. And then additionally, in terms of emotional exhaustion, I think going back to what I previously said, having a support system and developing like a strategy support was the most important thing to me in debate, like above all. Once I realized that I had people that I could rely on, or people that I could just message and be like, this happened, I don't know what to do, and they would help, like that is such a comforting feeling, knowing that you don't have to go through this alone. And it is something that I think is like probably one of my most major coping methods for just dealing with everything in speech and debate, is recognizing that I don't have to deal with this alone, and being able to identify those support systems or where I can get those strategies of support has been like one of the most important and helpful things for me. And I feel like it would also additionally be like very, very helpful for others, especially novices, I think, in this event, because this activity can be very draining for them.
Really quickly, I unfortunately need to go right now. I have another commitment, but right before I leave, I just want to thank all the panelists, at least so far. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know this discussion, especially today, has been so emotionally exhausting, and a lot of emotional labor that goes into talking about things like this that are so heavy. So I just want to thank everyone for willing to speak about these things, because you can go through things, but it's another like time of energy to just talk about them. So thank you so much for sharing. And I hope the rest of the panel is going to go well. Nabika is going to take over. I hope everything goes great, and I'm definitely going to watch the recording. Thank you all again.
Okay, so thank you everyone again, like for sharing like your responses on some of the questions that we've had so far. There is another question in the chat that I think is a really good one. And it's, what steps do you think that we can make our teams more acknowledge class disparities more? So like this kind of, like, I think it's a perfect segue from our previous questions. So anyone who wants to speak on that, feel free to jump on in.
Yeah, I can kick us off, I guess. So the question is like, what steps do you think we should take to make our team more acknowledging of class disparities? I guess it would depend for a lot of teams, but first and foremost, I think is recognizing how severe of an issue it is, i.e. it goes beyond the fact that someone maybe didn't have like a fitting suit jacket for the day of a tournament, or it goes beyond the fact that like someone had to work extra hours so that they could afford to go to a tournament. It has a very real impact on our health and on our ability to engage in rounds. And so what happens out of round is often just as important, if not more important than what happens in round. Like I think Paulina gave a really important example. And so I guess like that first step is always really important, especially for teams who maybe do not have as visible class disparities or slash do not already have a visible infrastructure for class disparities, for supporting class disparities. And I think after we recognize that it is such an important problem, then the next most immediate step is always slash like what worked for me was just immediately working with the things that were most proximate to me in my area. And so this meant things like reaching out to the administration or just doing extensive work with our advisor and with our captains to make sure that if there is any resources available in our local area, i.e. from like a local auxiliary club or even from like the school like administration, if they have any leftover funding, being able to utilize that, because oftentimes there are a lot more resources near us that we aren't as aware of until we actually do the work to try and find them and make them more accessible, which is in part probably intentional, or at least like a structural oversight. But yeah, after y'all have been able to discuss how class disparities impact every single one of our teammates and our opponents and everyone, it is also probably important to reach out immediately like to the people in our proximity for support before we can reach out on a broader level, because I think that the most immediate forms of support for class disparities comes at an immediate or like a very personal or micro political level.
Yeah, I just had kind of one little quick thing to add on to that. I think again, yeah, like when you're going to discuss class disparities with your team, I think it is important to kind of not try to group it in with other forms of disparities when you're discussing them, because I think that an important nuance is that discrimination based on wealth in debate is a lot more difficult to like see compared to, as people are generally more likely to make assumptions based on those factors. So I think that it can be oftentimes more hidden than people think it is. Makes it very important to recognize, and probably deserves its own discussion when you're doing it. So I think that's kind of something you should keep in mind if you're going to do those discussions on your team.
Okay, if any of the panelists would like to speak up, that would be appreciated. And if not, we can move on to the next question. So we could give it a few seconds. All right, cool. Yeah.
One thing I was gonna add really quickly, because I was thinking, yeah, David actually has like a really good point in saying that because these class disparities are less visible, it is really good to separate or to approach them distinctly. And I think in doing so, like one important thing to consider, especially because like I think administrations and other structures are oftentimes a little bit resistant, is to recognize what you deserve or what your team deserves, and to recognize and to be less afraid of pushing for these things. I think too often we are much too kind, or we oftentimes kneecap what we're going to say when we ask for things. And so I would say that especially in terms of acknowledging and addressing these class disparities is to confront them with the severity that they are owed. And so this looks like things like being unrelenting, or at least being a little firmer with administrations and tournament directors than what we normally think is okay or allowed for us, and to recognize that we do have a space and that it is absolutely important and necessary for us to ask for these things very firmly so that we are given what we are owed. Because redistributing wealth is always inherently something that is going to be met with a lot of resistance. And if we want to make it happen, we need to recognize that we cannot stop after the first no, or like after the first few soft no's, that creating support and conditions of support for lower income people in debate comes in a very resistant path and method, and that when we do ask people who are proximate to us for support, we should be willing to ask firmly, and we should be willing to acknowledge that this is something that oftentimes doesn't get the severity that it should be afforded.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like if there is anyone else that wants to add to this, even the audience, obviously like we're nearing the end of our panel, so it'd be interesting to have like a discussion. So yeah, feel free to speak up, and if not, we can move on to our next question.
I'll agree with the other panelists. I think all the things that they stated were pretty true. I think it's interesting because I went back and helped coaching at my old school I used to go to, the public school I used to go to, and it was interesting to like see, especially with the online setting. I would personally say it exacerbates the class difference, and it's a lot more noticeable in the use of technology and especially the internet. And I've debated last year in some online tournaments at like the front end of COVID, and it's interesting because I think that a lot of the times, like wealth disparities and maybe class disparities will affect the way that someone can debate. And I think that addressing those are very important because it's things that they can't control, like their internet or their computers. And I think that those should be addressed and at least understood by people on the team. And I think that addressing it early is important so everyone's understanding of everyone else's situation with the matter.
Yeah, that's super important. And it kind of like segues perfectly into our next question, which is like, what are some specific barriers you saw or faced because of inequalities in wealth or class in speech and debate? We've already kind of touched on this, but I think it'd be really important for us to kind of delve into those in depth.
Well, I'll jump in there again and say I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed with like disparities is the ability to travel. I've heard this brought up before, but I think that is something that should be touched on is like the national circuit, especially TOC level, is very inaccessible to the majority of debaters and is held by a very thin class of debaters. And oftentimes, like I feel like those tournaments should be more accessible, maybe with scholarships or the ability for regular students to go because of the travel and the spread outness of those tournaments across the country and in locations such as like Ivy League schools. It's oftentimes for normal debaters to be able to go to those, and it creates like such a skill difference in debaters who debate at the local circuit or even the state circuit and those who debate on the national circuit and at the TOC level. And I think that that's one of the biggest things I've noticed. And like I said, I've been in public school all of high school, and we've never been to a TOC tournament out of state, and those things are afforded to a lot of other students. And so I think that making a way for those students to be able to achieve those kind of tournaments would create a better equality within debate.
I'm gonna jump in next. Like last year, what I experienced before like all of these COVID issues is my school had to pick and choose what tournaments to go to, basing and building off of what Nathan said. That's totally true. We didn't even have TOC like in our rearview mirror. Like we weren't even thinking about it. It wasn't on our radar. It wasn't a tournament we were looking at going to because it's so costly and so expensive. And we had to pick and choose what tournaments we had gone to based off of cost. And not only has like wealth and class really like decided and put like path we were on for debate, but also what funding our school gave. In a lot of schools, debate isn't really seen as the top priority, as it's a norm that athletics would be capped or on top of that. So with your school not really paying as much attention to speech and debate as it should, because it is a really important event that you can partake in your college and high school career, it really does affect the competitors. We had to pick and choose specific tournaments. We had maybe like one or two nat circuits on our radar which we had gone to, and For some of us, including me, I couldn't go to all of them because the costs were so expensive. And, there's probably some other schools out there who didn't even have the chance to get to go any national circuits last year or, ever. And the fact that that's a really big issue, and that's something that I've experienced personally, and I know other people have as well, is something that's really troubling. Maybe more funding from your district, from your school, and more fundraising, or even to the schools that don't have the chance to really fundraise. you know it's what happened, but that's a really big disparity that I get to see, is that some people can't even afford to really just go to these tournaments altogether. And I think that it should be made more accessible for everyone as a whole to really be able to go to these tournaments. And if they were made more accessible, regardless of where they were placed, at an Ivy League school, at a college, locally, wherever, we're trying to do this for the experience, to create awareness and better our world. It shouldn't be based off of money or what class you are. It should be based off of the accessibility that we should be able to give to our competitors, which is not what's happening right now. So change with that would be great, but it's just so apparent and obvious that really no one can miss these disparities in today's world in speech and debate.
I totally agree with everyone. I do think that a really specific thing in my team was that we didn't have a coach because our school couldn't pay anyone to do it. And that left me out of a lot of conversations in my league. Like, I couldn't go to league meetings where I wanted to voice a lot of these issues. And I even had like solutions ready, and I was so excited because they kicked me out of the meeting because I wasn't an adult. I was at like over 18, right? So I think that coaches shouldn't have to play like this large part of every single discussion all the time, because sometimes coaches are the ones who are, one, like either perpetrating that problem, or two, not available to speak up for you. So I wish that leagues and states, or whatever circuit, would appreciate the student voice more and not wait until you have like this coach representation to like to talk about your issue um, to other adults. I mean, there's also a lot of um, ageism in debate as well. I mean, for that reason, like, it seems like we, even though we're supposed to be these powerful, strong kids who are just ready for advocacy, it feels like we don't even have a voice within our leagues when it comes to like the little adult conversations that they have amongst each other. And it's weird because it's the high school speech and debate team. It's not the, like, obviously not the adult speech and debate team. So I don't see why there has to be like these exclusive conversations that kids aren't part of, unless it has to do with maybe like resolutions or like things that are reasonably secretive, right? But so I found a lot of disappointment in that, especially since my league advertised itself as being super inclusive. I wish that they would have just let me join that meeting instead of writing it all out in an email and then them not responding back to me. I wish I could have been there to represent stuff myself and not wait for an adult who hasn't been through it to give their own watered down version, or their time effective version. um, yeah.
Yeah, I can add on a little bit. I think I for sure agree with a lot of the stuff that Pauline is saying. I think another example of a barrier that I kind of witnessed when I competed was definitely kind of the barrier of like formal clothing and dress codes in debate and their role. So I talked about this in like a BR article that I wrote at the end of my senior year, kind of as like a reflection. But for the vast majority of my senior year, I kind of stopped wearing formal clothes to tournaments, and I would just like show up in whatever, like sweatpants, sweatshirt, or like khakis or something like that. And I guess I like when I did that, like what I noticed was I did it for, I think I counted it up, and I think I did it for over like 100 rounds or something. And I never really got any comments from judges saying like, oh, your clothing or something like that, right? But I guess my lack of barrier kind of began to make me more aware of other barriers that may pop up, or like other barriers that exist. Like, I probably didn't get any comments because, straight white man dressing like more casually is like seen as, oh, like it's cool or whatever. Like, oh, it's casual, right? But for example, if a person of color were to do such a thing, maybe it's seen as sloppy or something like that, right? So I think that's definitely something that can be reflected in how dress is seen in the debate space and speech space as well. But I think that's a barrier that isn't really discussed that much, but definitely I became aware of my senior year as I kind of delved more into the topic, and I like wrote that article and stuff like that. Something that I was very interested in to explore, and sad to see that it's still such a large factor in a lot of people's experiences.
Yeah, I like that we're acknowledging how intersectional these issues are, of course. Like, I mean, being not being lower income and then being a particular race and being a particular gender, you know, obviously they all add up to something. I know that. I mean, I'm obviously white, right? But like being female, obviously, like other panelists have mentioned, has been kind of a barrier as well. I've had judges tell me to put my hair up, and I've been like, is my hair that distracting? Even if my hair was like this, they'd be like, put your hair up. Or my coach would be like, you're really gonna wear like that dress? Like, even if it was just like longer, it would just be too girly. Or it had this pink button up. Oh my gosh, the biggest deal on my team. I couldn't wear the pink button up because I was supposed to be like Elle Woods from Legally Blonde, and that was somehow demeaning. So I mean, I'm glad that we're like aware of this. I wish that we were a reflection of like the speech debate teams that we represent or are out there. Honestly exciting. Like, David, you gave me hope. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess adding on to this, if we're still just sharing our experiences with class, I I agree with what David is saying, especially in terms of formal wear. I The only coat that I had freshman year of debate, which I would wear to my policy tournaments, and it was a men's sports coat. And because I was like 5'2", like very underweight at the time, I would show up and it would look really ridiculous on me. It would just sort of slouch over me. And I remember I would get told all the time by my opponents that I looked like a little kid, or that I looked a little too young to be at a debate tournament because of what I was wearing. And that was the only thing I had at the time. And 2 weekends ago, I did my first tournament where the only thing I wore was, I literally just wore my pajamas and a hoodie, and it felt really good to just wear that. And especially with online debate, because we didn't turn on cameras. It felt really good to not be evaluated by how I looked for one round, or at least for one tournament. That was a very good feeling. I think independent of that too, there was also just so much that I think about now that affected my experiences with class and space. I was food insecure when I attended public school, and because my mother didn't know how to fill out the free lunch forms, I would just, oftentimes it would be before tournaments, especially on school days, or even like the day of practices, I would just have like not eaten anything. Or I would go to tournaments where the only thing I would have would be like 2 5-hour energies that one of our senior varsity members brought, and like a glass of water, and that'd be it. And it would be so unhealthy for me because it would take me so much energy to deal with that, and with everything else going on, that I would enter rounds with so much less energy or mental capacity. And when I did fine, you know, everything felt fine. I felt like I could sustain these really unhealthy practices. But it was also this realization that like this method is not sustainable. It like, and having that acknowledgement and realizing how unsustainable it is, or how many barriers there are to participating in speech and debate as a lower income person, becomes like very, very exhausting. And it gets to the point where it's like tournaments become like chores. And so this activity doesn't really become fun if you can't access it to the same degree as anyone else, which is why I think like thinking about these experiences, it really does make me realize that like a lot of the times, like when I did bad in rounds, I would always chalk it up to myself never being enough. But it was also like important to recognize that there was things outside of my control that limited my ability to produce energy or to engage in the round at the same level that other people were able to. And this realization of like, if my needs aren't met, I can't participate in debate. It was what really helped me understand also that if other people's needs are met, then they can't participate in debate at the same level either, right? Like that is a prior question to whether or not we can engage in any sort of like discussion about, you know, whether or not the app is a good idea or not, or whether or not like the model of debate is good or not. It becomes a question of like, what can we do outside the round to make sure that like these structural unfairnesses can be addressed first.
I would love to add on if you guys don't mind. Kind of bouncing off what Paulina and David previously said with all of like the clothing issues. I personally love to wear pantsuits, and like Anya, I'm 5'2". I'm really short, and like I have a really slim frame build. And I've been to tournaments where they're like, "Why are you wearing a pantsuit? You're a girl. You're supposed to have a skirt on. That looks terrible on you." And it's happened on multiple occasions. And not only has other like judges and competitors said that to me, but also my own teammates. They're like, "Well, girls aren't supposed to wear that." What does that have to do with anything? If I like it, then, let me wear what I want to wear. And it's been an issue. And I know in debate, it's more of like a norm for you to wear like cool, calm colors. And I've had some, different blazers and, suits that, are more color striking than, the normal that people are used to. And it's like a culture shock. They're like, "What are you doing? You're not allowed to wear this." And they go on and on and on. And I've seen other people in, speech and debate, primarily this issue revolves around debate, where, the guys can wear whatever they want, but when it comes to a girl, they're supposed to act a certain way. And, that really is a really big issue. What if that's, like the only suit that I could afford? I just don't have this plethora of all these suits in my closet. And, as long as I can get a suit and it's the one I like I should be able to wear that. Not only that, when I first started out with debate, kind of like, touching on what Paulina was saying, I had a coach that told me that I needed to act and walk like a man in debate, and that was the only way for me to be successful, and that other than that I was going to fail if I was to talk or walk like a woman. And that was very striking to me as a new freshman into high school. Like, what are you trying to fill my head with? We should be accepting of what we are and what we want to be, rather than trying to shape us in a certain and specific way, which is really problematic. I don't know if any of you guys have heard about the pink pad movement in Congress, but we had this down in Florida several months ago last year, where we had this pink pad. And it's funny that we took this upon ourselves as competitors, and that judges and other district and like tab people didn't notice these issues, but we had pink pads to promote the advancement of girls in debate, because you would look at all the elim rounds and a lot of them would just be the boys, and it was really problematic, and girls weren't placing and they weren't advancing. So they were doing this, trying to make it apparent to the rest of like the Congress community, like, guys, or you all, like, this is an issue, we need to fix this. And not only have I obviously noticed like the wealth and class disparities, but it's really important to acknowledge like the gender disparities as well. People really leave those to go unnoticed, and that's a really big issue that I think that needs to be touched on. And it seems that a lot of the rest of the panel has dealt with their own issues, and I'm glad we've spoken about it to create awareness. I just hope we can create permanent change with that.
Yeah, I also wanted to say that I think it's cool how we're noticing that again, like, wealth and gender do go hand in hand. I mean, there's a lot of studies that say that it's more expensive to be woman, or to do woman confirming beauty routines or things that you're expected to do. But I also wanted to say that it's really hard for a lot of people who are questioning their gender, or gender fluid in speech and debate. It feels like it's like dudes wear suit and tie, and then girls like wear like our dresses and our skirts. And I think that's honestly like, it's bad, because we're supposed to be that progressive space, and if we don't allow it for ourselves, like, then that's just a horrible, like, we're not gonna like make the big changes that we talk about in round. I think that there should be like, honestly, like a push for people to be able to actually advocate what they're doing in round. I mean, they should like be followed up by their coaches and be like, "Hi, so like, are you gonna go volunteer at that immigration center? Like, are you gonna go like feed homeless shelters since you claim to be pro-life?" Like, like, I think that people should be followed up after their cases. Um, but I also like, obviously, Harry Styles, everyone saw him wear a dress and it was fantastic. But it's almost like, would we like honestly not judge someone if they of a guy wore a dress like around, or like wore like I don't know, tights or whatever I'm supposed to wear, right? Like I think that it's honestly not even safe for men either, because they're also expected to be super, like commanding and yeah, like strong and round, or they're expected to do better. And I also think that we should address that too, the toxic masculinity and the internalized misogyny, but also the fact that we don't really allow a lot of men to like experiment or to do things that aren't so like stereotypically male. I think that we're like perpetuating those really bad behaviors when we expect, the men to win around because they're more positively aggressive, or they're not aggressive, they're just like direct, or they're just straight to the point. So yeah, again, I think that gender and wealth do go hand in hand, for the previous reasons I mentioned. But I also think that this is probably a larger discussion that we could always have. But uh, gender fluidity or gender lines is it's really gross in debate. I mean, I guess Harry Styles isn't the first person to question that, but in a way, I'm thankful that we're glamorizing him to some extent. I hope it translates to speech and debate.
I want to really quickly address like the comments that are in the chat right now and agree to what they're saying, that debate really isn't as progressive as a lot of people think. And building off of what everyone else has really said, just the fact that we have to take issues upon ourselves, and that the rest of like the adults don't notice what's going on, and that us kids have to take this upon ourselves to really create change, is really scary. And girls can't wear pantsuits because that's not okay. Girls can't act a certain way because that's not okay. But it does go like the both ways. Paulina, you're absolutely right. There's all these issues where people don't recognize that there's a lot of like stereotypical norms for males as well that people don't want to acknowledge. Like that's just a conversation people aren't really ready to have, that they have all of these things against them. They can't express themselves or be who they really are. And I can see that in the debate side as well. I know many people who want to express themselves and want to be free as a male, but they're frowned upon because they're not fitting to the stereotypical norms that debate wants them to follow. And, they get pinned down in rounds for that. Personally, I've been pinned down for being too aggressive because I'm supposed to not act like that as a girl. I'm supposed to be soft. And versus a person who's screaming at me in round, which is completely fine, and they, place number one in the round. But, it goes both ways. It's like, oh, well, if a guy is too calm, then they get docked for that. Like they're supposed to act a certain way, be too masculine, be aggressive. Like if that's not how they want to act, then let them be. We're supposed to be progressive as speech and debate as a whole, but I completely like understand your point saying that debate isn't. And I can see like from a side where I mostly compete in debate and not as much as, speech, I can see where it's not as progressive. I recently dipped into extemporaneous speaking, which isn't necessarily even like the full force of the speech world. And I can see how much more progressive they are than debate, how much more willing and open they are into seeing people break these norms. And, I want to take that into debate with me, to help people understand. But there's not only gender issues with females, it also goes both ways. And people who are gender fluid, they're just not accepted, and that's not okay. And things need to change. And I'm glad that someone acknowledged that in the comments so that we could bring this up. So it's, more wide known that there are these issues and that it needs to be changed, and that it's okay for people to act as if the way they want to, that they don't have to conform to social norms.
Unfortunately, we've reached the end of our panel. So before we leave, I wanted to personally thank all of the panelists for speaking to us today. I think we brought a lot of issues in the speech and debate community to light, and also some solutions, which are equally as important. So yeah, with that, I guess this panel is over. So you all are free to leave. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, and have a great weekend.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.